No formal trial was yet convened, but Stannis intended to question her about Joffrey's crimes, about her knowledge of his parentage, and about any hidden caches of wildfire that might still threaten the city. Cersei answered little. She glared at her new king, accusing him of arrogance, calling the alliance with Robb Stark a travesty and labeling Stannis a pretender to the pretender. The assembled lords bristled, but Stannis silenced the hall with a raised hand. He pressed her. Did she admit that her children were born of incest with Jaime Lannister? Did she acknowledge that Joffrey was no rightful Baratheon? Cersei sneered, refusing to yield a word. If anything, the line of questioning only fed her pride. Yet the hush in the throne room grew heavier, for everyone remembered how Ned Stark's knowledge of that secret had led to his downfall. Melisandre, standing at the side, regarded Cersei with an unreadable gaze. The Red Woman made no move to intervene, though the tension crackled. At last, Stannis ordered that Cersei be taken away. A formal trial would come once Tywin Lannister was well enough, or if he remained too injured, it would proceed without him. Whispers rippled through the court that Cersei's refusal to confess might seal her doom, and possibly that of her two youngest children. Tommen and Myrcella dwelled in somewhat kinder captivity, though Myrcella was old enough to sense the peril. Mace Tyrell even proposed a betrothal. Myrcella could be wed to one of his sons as a means of neutralizing the Lannister threat. Stannis did not outright reject the idea, seeing in it a chance to keep the girl from becoming a focal point for Lannister loyalists. Yet he wanted no rash decisions. The realm still reeled from the war, and he had no wish to ignite a new crisis over the succession. Meanwhile, Tywin Lannister's health hovered between life and death. The maesters said a lung infection had taken hold. Late one evening, Renly visited the tower where Tywin lay, flanked by Brienne of Tarth as his guard. An odd hush filled the corridor as he stepped inside, for no one was sure what reaction might come from the powerful old lion, even on his sickbed. Tywin lay propped on pillows, face pale, breath rattling in his chest. He opened his sharp green eyes and managed a faint sneer at the sight of Renly. Renly sat, studying the man who had once commanded the greatest army in Westeros. They exchanged carefully chosen words. Tywin asked if Renly intended to show him off in a cage, parading him for the city's amusement. Renly assured him no, though Tywin's trial was inevitable. A flash of anger crossed Tywin's eyes when Renly mentioned Joffrey's questionable parentage and the city's new king. That mention seemed to weaken him, his breath rasping. Renly asked about the location of any hidden Lannister reserves or any weapons that might threaten the capital. Tywin only coughed. In the end, Renly left with no new revelations. Tywin remained as cold and dangerous as ever, though sickness had robbed him of physical power. The next morning, rumor said his condition had worsened. Some believed the mighty lion of Casterly Rock would not live long enough to stand trial. Others speculated that Tywin was feigning weakness, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Even as King's Landing braced for the uncertain resolution of the Lannister affair, the ships mustered for the Iron Islands campaign. Stannis placed Ser Davos Seaworth in charge of a large portion of the royal fleet. Lord Redwyne of the Arbor supplied additional war galleys. Together, they planned to sail for Fair Isle and from there strike toward Pike, while another segment of the Tyrell fleet screened the Westerland's coasts. The hope was to pressure Balon Greyjoy to withdraw his forces from the north to defend his own seat, thus relieving the inland raids. Across the sea, a different rumor began to stir. Daenerys Targaryen, the last scion of the house that had once conquered and ruled Westeros, was said to possess living dragons. Merchants from the free cities told outlandish stories of 3 young dragons perched on her shoulders, of a Khalasar at her command, and of cities across the narrow sea that might soon yield to her. Such tales were easy to dismiss as exaggeration. Yet Varys, the spider, quietly suggested to King Stannis that the Targaryen girl should not be dismissed out of hand. He had once served the Targaryens, after all. But Stannis was not a man to fret over rumors of a girl across the sea when the Iron Islands threatened his shores and the realm still reeled from civil war. He told Varys that Westeros would handle one thing at a time. The Master of Whisperers bowed, expression inscrutable. Some nights later, Varys slipped into Melisandre's presence, and no one knew what words they exchanged, for neither spoke of the meeting openly. In the north, Robb's troubles multiplied. Though Winterfell was reclaimed, the keep stood half-ruined, and his brothers were missing. Search parties combed the surrounding forests, found tracks that might have been those of the young Starks, but no one was certain. Lady Catelyn prayed in the godswood daily, ignoring the scorch marks and broken branches that had once been so sacred. She recalled how Ned had been the one to kneel by the heart tree and speak in the hush of the old god's presence. Now Ned was gone, murdered in King's Landing, and her two youngest sons might be lost as well. Amid this worry, ravens came bearing news of Deepwood Mott's plight. Lord Bolton had mustered men from the Dreadfort to assist in recapturing it, but the Ironborn there had proven resilient. Asha Greyjoy, cunning and swift, used the thick forests surrounding the Mott to mount guerrilla attacks. Not wanting to risk losing more men in a rushed assault, Bolton proposed a siege, though the Mott was less a fortress and more a wooden keep. The entire campaign threatened to bog down, giving Asha time to entrench. Robb decided he must bring the full force of the North against the Ironborn. He summoned the Manderleys from White Harbor, the Umbers, the Glovers, and the Serwins, any who could muster men quickly. Winter might be coming, but while the roads were still passable, he intended to break the Ironborn once and for all. By reaffirming that the North was not to be trifled with, he hoped to ensure that no future claimant, Southern or otherwise, would dare set foot there without permission. Lady Catelyn suggested sending an emissary to Balon Greyjoy, reminding him of Theon's captive state. Perhaps, she reasoned, Balon cared enough for his son to negotiate. Robb was skeptical, for he had known Theon intimately as a boy, and Theon himself had admitted that Balon's affections were cold. Still, he agreed to let Catelyn send a raven, demanding the Ironborn withdraw from the north or risk Theon's life. Weeks passed with no reply. The war in the western seas unfolded in parallel. Ser Davos's fleet first seized a foothold on Fair Isle with minimal resistance, as the Lannister garrison had already been depleted. Then they sailed around the rocky coasts, seeking Greyjoy ships. They found scattered longships that fled at the sight of the superior royal galleys. Some small victories buoyed the morale of Davos's men, but no decisive battle emerged. The Ironborn never gave them a chance for a grand naval engagement. Instead, the roving raiders darted from cove to cove, continuing their depredations in the Westerlands. At one point, Davos's scouts reported that Balon himself had taken a portion of the Ironborn fleet northward, possibly to support Asha at Deepwood Mott or to challenge the North's coastline. Receiving this news by Raven, Renley urged Ser Davos to push onward to Pike. Perhaps if they took Balon's seat, the old Kraken would be forced to sue for peace. Davos complied, though his ships were battered by storms near the Isles. The weather around the Iron Islands was notoriously treacherous, churning the seas to foam. Still, the fleet persisted, capturing or burning several small fishing villages on the Isles that fueled Balon's war effort. In the end, the war at sea remained inconclusive for many months, a pattern of feints, raids, and ambushes. The Ironborn were masters of that style, and Davos could only hope to slowly strangle their supply lines. Meanwhile, back in the capital, the small folk grumbled at the cost of feeding and housing the men needed to keep the peace. Mace Tyrell demanded titles and lands in the Westerlands as compensation for the Tyrell knights who had fought so bravely. Newly minted lords vied for Cersei's old chambers, or for any prestigious post near the king. The deeper political question was whether the realm could truly be mended under one crown when so much remained unsettled. The Riverlands still suffered from banditry, for the years of war had left men too poor and desperate to return to normal life. Black Walder Frey and other Frey men, resentful of how the war had upended the old social contracts, lurked in the region. Some rumored that Walder Frey sought an opportunity to strike out independently, possibly forging ties to the Vale or even the Ironborn if it meant revenge for perceived slights. King Stannis's justice, while stern, was not always swift enough to address the swirl of local feuds. Edmure Tully tried to restore order in the Riverlands by calling a great council at Riverrun, where lords sworn to House Tully could air grievances and settle disputes. For the most part, they agreed to Edmure's leadership, but the seeds of resentment were planted deep. If Edmure proved unable to keep his domain safe from bandits and broken men, more trouble might arise. Farther north, one morning in Winterfell, a search party returned with unexpected news. Two young boys, resembling Bran and Rickon, had been seen traveling under the protection of a large, gentle giant of a man. That match suggested the presence of Hodder, the simple-minded stable hand. Some farmers swore they had spotted the group heading toward the wall. Robb seized on the rumor with hope, dispatching more men to track them. If his brothers lived, it would be a miracle in these times. Yet where had they gone and why? The possibility that Bran and Rickon sought refuge with the Night's Watch brought another matter to Robb's mind. Word from the wall spoke of dire portents. Wildlings gathering in great numbers beyond the icy barrier, rumors of monstrous creatures that lurked in the snows. Lord Commander Jeor Mormont had sent ravens to every corner of the realm, warning that a greater threat stirred in the far north. Before the War of the Five Kings, few heeded those warnings. Now, after so much bloodshed, fewer still had the capacity to send aid. Yet Robb felt uneasy. Even if the realm recognized him as king in the north, that land extended to the wall, and beyond the wall lay a vast unknown. The old stories that Old Nan had once told him flashed through his mind. The White Walkers, the long night, the things that lurked in eternal winter. If winter truly was coming, perhaps the Northern King would soon face an enemy far deadlier than the Ironborn. Still, immediate concerns demanded his attention. With Theon imprisoned in Winterfell's dungeons, Robb advanced on Deepwood Motte, determined to corner Asha Greyjoy. The terrain favored the defenders, but the Northmen had a much larger host. The Bolton forces had established a loose siege, cutting off Asha's supply lines, but skirmishes in the surrounding woods continued. When Robb arrived, the ring of steel tightened. Asha, no fool, recognized the doom that crept upon her. Some claimed she attempted a daring breakout by night, slipping through the siege lines with a handful of loyal Ironborn. But the watchers in the trees spotted them. In a fierce clash, the Ironborn were scattered. Asha was dragged from her horse, cursing like a wounded animal. Half her men lay dead in the pine needles, while the rest fled into the darkness, only to be hunted down by vengeful northern scouts. Dragged to Robb's pavilion, Asha refused to kneel. She stood, hair tangled, armor dented, but eyes glinting with defiance. "Kill me," she said, "and be done with it. We Greyjoys do not beg." Robb asked if she wished to see her brother Theon again. Asha spat on the ground. "My father might trade something for him, but me? You've gained nothing but another mouth to feed." Roose Bolton, standing behind Robb, murmured coldly, "Perhaps she can be made more cooperative with the right methods." Robb felt a chill hearing the subtle menace in Bolton's voice. He'd accepted Bolton's aid, for the Dreadfort's men were numerous and cruelly effective, but he trusted the Pale Lord only as much as the direwolf might trust a viper. Still, Bolton's suggestion reminded Robb that a measure of fear might work on Asha. He had no wish to harm her needlessly, but he needed a bargaining chip. Balon Greyjoy, so far, had shown no interest in negotiating for Theon. Perhaps if they dangled Asha's fate in front of him, that might provoke a response. Robb ordered that she be chained but given decent quarters and food, so long as she caused no trouble. She could live for now. The recapture of Deepwood Motte effectively ended the Ironborn presence on the mainland of the north. Only scattered raiding parties might remain, easy prey for the local lords who knew the forests and hills intimately. With Winterfell and Deepwood Motte secured, Robb had reclaimed his homeland, albeit at a grave cost. Yet the bitterness in his heart did not fade. The Northmen demanded retribution against Balon Greyjoy's seat. Robb wondered if he could unify with Stannis Baratheon, just one more time, to launch a combined assault on Pike itself. Then again, the North had already endured enough southern entanglements to last a lifetime. As autumn deepened, the rains grew colder, and the roads became muddy. Far across the sea, armies and ships continued their maneuvers, but the realm felt the looming shadow of winter. King Stannis, meanwhile, pushed ahead with reorganizing the crown's finances. The royal treasury was nearly empty after the war, and the Iron Bank of Bravos had begun to demand repayment of old debts. Peter Baelish, who had fled King's Landing earlier, was rumored to be forging new alliances in the Vale or even in the Free Cities. His machinations had kept the crown afloat once, but now, with him gone, the burden fell on Stannis and his counselors. All of it weighed heavily on Stannis. Each day, he rose before dawn, pacing the stone drum tower as he had done in Dragonstone, reading reports by candlelight while the city outside dozed in uneasy slumber. Sometimes Renley joined him for breakfast in a small solar, where they'd speak quietly about the war, about the reconstruction, about matters of state. Despite their tenuous truce, there were moments when old resentments flared. Renley disliked the presence of Melisandre. Stannis bristled whenever Renley seemed too quick to promise small favors to lesser lords. Yet these tensions were mild compared to the open warfare they might once have unleashed on each other. They both remembered that bloodshed was the quickest route to losing everything they'd gained. One overcast afternoon, Davos Seaworth returned to King's Landing, having left his fleet in the capable hands of a Tyrell admiral near Pike. The Onion Knight brought ill news. The Ironborn refused to be cornered, slipping between patrols and continuing their raids. To truly break them, an invasion of Pike might be needed, but such an operation would require a massive muster of men and ships. The realm might not be ready for another large-scale conflict so soon, especially after the devastation of the war against the Lannisters. Stannis gathered his council in the old Targaryen war room near the top of the Red Keep, with its massive painted table of Westeros spread out under flickering torchlight. Davos pointed to the Iron Islands. Mace Tyrell rubbed his chin, clearly reluctant to commit more men. Lord Redwyne stated that storms had damaged a good portion of his fleet. Meanwhile, the Westerlands were crying out for help to rebuild their mines and villages. How could they afford a drawn-out campaign against the Ironborn? Melisandre spoke quietly in the corner, stating that the flames showed a great darkness in the west, that the drowned god's wrath might be stoked by further bloodshed. Some scoffed at the notion of reading truth in flames. Stannis only frowned, neither dismissing nor endorsing her prophecy. He wanted a tangible plan. Renley eyed the table, tapping his knuckles on the image of Pike. He suggested a more measured approach. Starve the Ironborn out, deny them spoils, and let them tear themselves apart under Balon's rule. Perhaps, in time, they would collapse. Davos and several admirals argued that such a blockade would be expensive and uncertain, as storms and the Ironborn's cunning might undermine it. The meeting ended with no firm consensus. That night, Stannis climbed to the battlements of the Red Keep, gazing over a city that still bore scars from the wildfire battle. He wondered if his destiny truly was to save this realm, as Melisandre so often claimed, or if he was simply placing a bandage over a sword wound. The truth weighed on him. Even if he pacified the Iron Islands, reigned in the east, and forced Dorne to bend the knee, another threat would always loom. If not from the north, then from across the sea. In Winterfell, snow began to dust the ramparts. Robb Stark walked the courtyard with a heavy fur cloak about his shoulders. Theon languished in the dungeons, refusing to speak. Asha remained under guard in a modest tower room, feigning indifference. Rickard Karstark arrived one afternoon with more news of banditry to the east, urging Robb to lead a punitive expedition. The boy who had once dreamed of honor and glory now found himself drowning in the unromantic details of governance. He conferred with his mother in the Great Hall, which was still under partial reconstruction from the damage Theon's men had done. Lady Catelyn reminded him that the old alliances with the Vale and the Riverlands might still be important. Even if the North was independent, there was trade to consider, safety for travelers, the flow of goods before winter closed every pass. The North could not become a sealed fortress. Its people would starve without southern grain. Robb asked her if she believed Stannis might remain an ally. The question hovered. Catelyn admitted that Stannis had thus far honored his pact with the North, but politics shifted as swiftly as the winds over the neck. Stannis might see advantage in pressing the North for tribute, or in forging a new agreement with the Ironborn, or who knew what else. Robb sighed, recalling the precarious dance of the great houses. He missed the days of simpler joys, riding with his father, feasting in the hall, laughing with his siblings. Now he was a king, and the crown was heavier than any physical weight he had borne in battle. The darkness that Melisandre spoke of, the threat beyond the wall, still lingered in the backs of men's minds. Rangers of the Night's Watch were said to have encountered strange foes in the frozen wastes, walkers with ice-blue eyes. Yet southern lords scoffed at such tales, calling them ghost stories. Even in the north, few believed wholeheartedly in the ancient legends. But the rumors persisted, carried by the Black brothers who dared journey south, begging for men and supplies.